What's up, you guys? Gonna make a video talk about the black flame. Now, my whole black flame path began in 2010 when I was in the Army. I was sleeping in my barracks. I fell asleep on my left side. The light in my room was on, so my room was fully lit. And oddly enough, I used to suffer from really terrible insomnia back then, and I happened to, this particular evening, fall asleep with my eyes open. Now, just as a bit of a backstory, I grew up experiencing sleep paralysis and waking up in the sleep paralysis state, and I would experience, terrible dread and fear. But there was also a strange sensation that accompanied the experience. Every time I would have the sleep paralysis experience growing up when I was young, I would feel some type of vacuum force sucking me out of my body, like sucking my fundamental center actually out of my body. And I would have to struggle against this vacuum force to stay inside my body. Now, growing up, it never actually successfully pulled me out of my body. Eventually, after dealing with this for several years, I learned how to kind of shift myself into a convulsion, and the convulsion would sling my consciousness back into my body, and I'd wake up fully. Otherwise, I would often be stuck in the sleep paralysis state, just my mind locked in fear and the fight or flight response, unable to think beyond, respond to my environment beyond simply fight or flight. So anyway, back in 2010, I'm asleep on my left side, the room lights on, my room's fully lit, I fall asleep with my eyes open, I wake up in the sleep paralysis state, and I feel that familiar sense of terror and dread, and I feel something coming closer to me, and the fear is just heightening. Just with every moment, it's just peaking beyond my threshold, and I just can't even, but I'm in the sleep paralysis state, so I'm just locked in it. There's nothing I can freaking do, and the fear is just growing and growing, and you gotta understand, from the moment I felt this presence, it was the utmost terror, and every moment was an escalation into an even greater utmost terror until I finally witnessed the thing, and it was actually standing on top of me, and it appeared as black flames, but it didn't have a humanoid form, but it were as though it were standing. And when this occurred, the simplest way to put it is I gained an expanded awareness. And I had, when the black flame appeared and I looked at it, all of a sudden my awareness expanded, phenomenally, and this alternate visual field, I felt it in my brain right here. I think it was the true third eye. And I don't mean imagination, I don't mean like in my mind, I mean another eye, complete with its own visual signal that it sent to my, center. Like my two physical eyes generated a visual signal that I experienced as sight, but this other alternate eye that opened up in my forehead, it generated a completely alternate signal, and so I saw reality with my two eyes, my physical eyes, and this alternate true third eye. And when I looked at the black flame with my two physical eyes, I could not see a face. But when I looked at it with my alternate third eye, I was able to see a face, and it basically had two holes for eyes and this big wide grin for a mouth, and from its mouth came red flames and smoke. But oddly enough, the black flames didn't produce any smoke. They were just black flames, which composed its, form, featureless form. Just a silhouette of fire as though it were standing. No humanoid shape like arms and legs. And I basically snapped to, and I just woke up in a pool of sweat. I mean, my whole bed was literally a pool of sweat. Now, here's the crazy thing. I was freezing cold, and I was burning hot at the same time. And my body, I was so cold, and I was shivering because I was cold. I was shivering so violently that it was hard to move. It was hard to position myself and stand up and get out of my bed because my whole body was shaking so violently because I was freezing cold. But at the same time, I'm beading sweat. I mean, beads of sweat are dripping down my body. And I freaking get up out of my bed and I start trying to walk to the bathroom. And, I'm literally creating pools of sweat as I'm freaking, my whole body's just shaking. It was the most extreme. I mean, there's nothing I've ever experienced more terrifying than that. But see, I became really curious about the experience. And over the next several years, I would encounter the black flame in different forms. A couple years later, after I got back home, I encountered the black flame again. But here's the thing: I've encountered the black flame a number of times, a great number of times, but I've only actually seen it with my physical 2 eyes on 3 occasions. So that's what I'll talk about here. So a couple years later, after 2010, maybe about somewhere between 2 to 4 years later, around 3.5, I was at my computer playing on FL Studio, and all of a sudden I felt that familiar, terrible dread and fear. And but I was awake, like I was fully awake. I was working on a freaking, melody, because I like to construct harmonizing melodies, complex melodies. Well, back then, when I had all that shit. But I felt this presence, and I could feel it coming from, behind me on that end of the house. And so I turn and I look, and, I'm kind of just frozen in shock, but at the same time, it's familiar. And I'm like, oh man, it's this being again. And then I see him. And now again, I didn't see any like humanoid form, but it was as though he just walked into the room and then paused like less than 15 feet from me, and just looking at me with a big wide grin. Again, he just had a big wide grin, and red flames coming out of its eyes and mouth, black fiery form. And then it just turned and walked out of the room. And again, when it appeared, I had the freaking expanded awareness, hyper expanded awareness. I mean, freaking blown out. Like I had completely alternate senses, and all my senses were freaking mega heightened. Though I will tell you this, the black flame didn't generate any sound or smell. Actually, I don't think on any occasion that I've encountered them. But anyway, now that I think about it, never experienced the sensation of touch. I've experienced the sensation of touch with different beings. Some of those stories are pretty far out too, pretty wild. And I've experienced audio. I think I could. Oh man, I'm going on a big tangent here. I would say that I probably experienced smell the least. But anyway, So a couple years after the second experience I encountered them, you got to understand this whole time I kind of got into occult philosophy, but I didn't read a bunch of the pop shit. I didn't get into the pop nonsense. What I would do is explore occult forums and look for people's experiences and read about people's experiences, ask people questions, ask people who had experience questions. I wasn't interested in having like theological arguments or like, theoretical debates and whatnot. I was more interested in learning more about my experiences and how it was I came to experience them and what it was I experienced, and just learning about the phenomenal reality itself, what I call it, the spirit world or other dimensions, whatever you want to refer to it as, the realm of the dead, whatever. I just wanted to learn more about, because I experienced these wild things, and I experienced a lot of wild stuff. I'm just telling you these main three experiences, and so the third experience happened another few years later. I can't remember exactly when, but it was sometime after 2012, for sure. The second experience was sometime after 2012. So the third experience would have had to have been maybe around just a couple years ago. But I just woke up one morning. It was about 9 or 10 a.m. in the morning. I woke up one morning and I didn't feel anything or sense anything or nothing. And I just looked to my left, and the black flame is just standing right there, right next to me, right next to my bed, just standing right next to me, just looking at me, just grinning. Like always, just a huge grin on his face. And you gotta understand, nothing really occurs when I encounter them like this. They just kind of, dude just appears, stands there, and I think I either like blinked or something, or rolled to the other side of my bed to get up. But I gotta mention this too. Standing next to him was a dog, and the dog also was Blackfire. The dog was kind of funny looking. He had this huge tongue. I thought that was weird. And his body, sparks kind of came out of his body, made little red poofy flames, like different parts of his body, kind of like he couldn't contain his form really. And then that entire day, the dog actually followed me around in my mind, like I could see it in my mind the whole day. Though I do remember at some point in the day, it ran off. I saw it. It kind of made this funny facial expression like a dog does when it is suddenly, attentive, like looking off in a direction and points its ears up. And then that's what I saw it do, and it just went off and I never saw it again. But from these experiences and from other experiences, I have tried to draw as many conclusions as I can, really create a vast array of conclusions, and try my best to construct various perspectives to view these whole experiences. Because I came in contact with this dilemma associated with these types of experiences. Essentially, it's the dilemma of self and non-self entities. When you encounter a being that you can see that on all apparent or obvious account is non-self, you still have to question, is it truly non-self or is it a self entity? Because I've had experiences with entities, and by all obvious apparent account, it's non-self. But with more, further deduction and, alternate perspective, I was able to conclude that, also formed the conclusion that it was a self-entity. And so I kind of learned to, over time, cultivate conclusion itself and adapt my perspective, collect perspectives, really, so I could have a variety of lenses to examine my own experiences. Kind of created a science about it. But those are some of the main things. And there's a bunch of other stuff too related to the Black Flame. But those are some of the main things that kind of initiated me into the whole path of the Black Flame.